My thesis is I think we're going to see an exodus of people leaving cities in the next decade.
That's happening. I agree with that. I don't think
Yeah.
those. I don't think I'm kind of speaking about what the establishment wants. I think you're 100% right. We're seeing that now. That has not hit critical mass yet,
No.
but um, I really hope that. I hope there is an exodus. I could see that we get to a point where there is sort of the cities become city states. They become like isolated states, and it's kind of like in Stalinist Russia. That's what happened with communism, is that they couldn't regulate the rural people. So the communism existed in the cities, but then the rural is where all the commerce, capitalism, and anarchy happened. Really,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what's going to happen, because the cities are getting, in Toronto, try to open a business in Toronto, like it's insane
Listen,
how regulated these places are.
I've been screaming city states for the last 5 years. I'm a big proponent of city states. It creates game theoretical models that's better. One thing that people don't understand is we'll bring Canada in it. Canada is a unique example. So for the size of land that we have the smallest population. Like we have the second biggest land mass of a nation after Russia. We have a diverse ethnicity in Canada,
Yeah,
quite multicultural. We're more or less like passive people. We come here for greener pastures, right? Like my parents left former Yugoslavia, communists is fuck this, I'm out of here. A lot of people
yeah,
left Russia, China, etc. It's much more greener grass over here. And you see the climate kind of heating up right now. So you have the federal government. So if you look at the Canadian Constitution, kind of clearly, especially on page 10 and 11, it clearly states what the federal government is responsible for. And it's not responsible for much. And it's the opposite today. They're responsible. They've put their fingers in pretty much every aspect of governance when it comes to society, from municipal to provincial to federal. They shouldn't be municipal and provincial. They should just be concerned for federal stuff. And when you look at broad laws that might help Ontario, not necessarily will help Alberta, because we have native problems for Ontario. We have our own issues, and the laws that we pass here should not be dictated or seated on Alberta. Vice versa, the laws that pass in Alberta should not be seated on Ontario. This is why people are pissed off with Quebec. Quebec's creating these rules that doesn't benefit Ontario, doesn't benefit Alberta. This is why you see Alberta. You're right. So you see Alberta right now pushing. They want to separate. So like when you create a city state, whether it's on the provincial level or maybe Kelowna down to the municipal level, you create competition. Switzerland's a good example where you have the cantons.
yeah, the cantons, exactly. Yeah, I'm totally. I'm a pretty hardcore. When you were talking about the Constitution, were you talking about 1982, the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Constitution?
Yeah.
It's just so that's the funny thing with that is read Article 59. Article 59 in the Canadian Constitution stipulates that the whole Constitution is subject to Article 59, in that until Quebec allows every one of its residents to teach the language of choice to their children, the Constitution is null and void. So we don't have a Constitution. It never came into effect. Canada, I mean, this is one thing that I get into in my podcast, like, as I've gone down the rabbit hole, and I've been reading acts and statutes in Canada for the last 3 months. We don't have a country. Canada doesn't exist. Canada is a myth. Canada was never confederated, and when Queen Victoria created the Statute Revision Act, or she pulled out Article 2 of the BNA Act through the Statute Revision Act, which ended the monarchy after then, because the Dominion got too expensive in the early or the late 1800s. So they ended the Dominion. When Queen Victoria died, Canada as we know it ceased to exist. And then in 1931 or 36, they brought in the Statute of Westminster, which officially ended it. We have in Canada a de facto state. Canada is just a corporation, and the provinces are corporations. It's just a big racket. It's interesting because it's like, it's almost this crazy free market thing. It's just nobody knows what it actually is. We think we have this government. And that's what I discovered with all this land stuff, with the Agricultural Land Commission, is what I discovered is that the acts themselves don't have force and effect, because they're supposed to receive this thing called royal assent from the Governor General. And if you read the Royal Assent Act of Canada, it says right in the preamble that royal assent is granted by written declaration. But when you look at a royal assent, what they did is they converted it into this ceremony because everybody in power wanted to keep their power. So they didn't want all the Canadian people to realize, like, oh my God, we're sovereign. We don't actually need these cronies. We can form our own constitution like the US did. But they never did. And so they created all these, just layers and layers of illusions. It's actually all there. It's neat. It's really hidden in plain sight. It's like there's actually no lies printed. It's all truth. It's all full disclosure. It's just nobody reads the terms of service. So they created this royal assent thing, which became this ceremony they do in the Legislative Assembly, where the lieutenant governor just sits there and gives a nod. So the ministers come out and read the bills, but she doesn't sign them. And the reason she doesn't sign them is because that would actually be committing fraud, because the lieutenant governors and the governor general have no real authority because the Queen died in 1901, and Queen Elizabeth is just a sort of a fake figurehead that they've used. I don't know what the arrangement between Canada and the royal family is anymore, but it's BS. So I learned this on my farm because I had a bureaucrat tried to shake me down. I had a guy from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency tried to come to my microgreens operation, which used to be in this greenhouse that I'm in right now. And he said, we're going to come and inspect your farm at this time and this time and this time. And I'd been learning enough about the legal stuff before then, where I said, okay. And I know the best way to win with these bureaucrats is to take what's called a conditional acceptance. So instead of saying, no, you can't come on my property, you go, okay, I'm happy to have you here on my property on these conditions. Number one, I would like to see a copy of the royal assent written on the CFIA Act of Canada. Secondly, I'd like to see all the documentation that says you have the authority to act under Her Majesty in good faith. Thirdly, I want a consulting fee. Fourthly, you've got 30 days to respond or the offer's null and void. Guy disappeared, never came back. That's when I started to realize, holy shit, this whole thing. And it's the same thing with the farmers and the ALR. So but the big thing in British Columbia is that there was no treaties ever signed here. Even if you look at the original, what Canada was, it was called Rupert's Land in the Hudson's Bay Charter. It ended at the Rocky Mountains. British Columbia is unceded. And that's why if you go to any government event here in British Columbia today, the first thing they will do is they'll stand up and say, we just first want to recognize that we're standing on the unceded land of the Silex territory, blah, 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 blah. It just sounds like pointless virtue signaling, but it's actually full disclosure. They're actually telling you 100% the truth. There is no Canada here. There's no Canada, period. But there's certainly none in BC. And BC is just a private corporation. It's registered on the United States Security Exchange Commission. It's all a big dog and pony show. But you tell this to the average person, they go, no. Because they can't handle the cognitive dissonance. They just won't go there. But I think this is actually our path to freedom, because this whole thing will disappear really quickly. More people start to realize that you don't have power over us. Where do you get your authority from? Start calling them out. Where does it come from?
No, the power's always in the people. We're the one to elect you. We're the ones that pay taxes for you to be in power. But going back to the city-states, it's interesting that you brought that up. You know, technically we have city-states in Canada. It's Aboriginal land. So if you look at 100%. What they have, right, so they're city-states. They have their own constitution, their own cops, their own tax.
Well, they're sovereign nations, actually. That's technically what they are.
Yeah. And so for me, I'm like, well, there's our example right there. I don't have to think of anything or create anything. It's right there in front of me. Perfect. Why can't I just duplicate that?
The reason you can't is because you're a legal person. That's why. Our birth certificates are corporate bonds. They're sureties. When you're born and your mom fills out your live registration of birth and then fills out your birth certificate, that's a surety that goes to the corporation that handles that, and then that's a bond, and that bond is that. So you're owned. But the thing is people don't realize that legal person, your name, all caps letters, isn't actually you. It's just like in the Matrix, man. It's like he pulls out of the tub and he looks at this farm and he's like, holy shit, look at this. This is flesh and blood. This is me. I'm a child of God. Well, that's what we are.
That's to give you a SIN number. It's not your name. You're a number.
100%. You're a number. And so the problem with revolution per se is that you're still a legal fiction. And until you uncouple yourself and become a sovereign man, a lot of the First Nations have already done this, man. I know a lot of people that do this stuff. And until you're sovereign, you don't have jurisdiction over your own body because you've accepted the legal authority of them.
You ever read the book Sovereign Individual? The Sovereign Individual?
Sovereign Individual?
Yeah.
No.
Oh fuck, solid read.
I've read a lot of stuff on this stuff though.
But my take on becoming like, I agree with you 100%. I think when you're born, you're whether you believe in God or not, but the divine life form, you're sovereign. The government does not give you permission for freedom of speech. The government doesn't give you permission to practice what sexuality. Government doesn't give you permission to marry or not marry whoever. That's sovereignly given to you when life is created by you know Earth itself.
Absolutely.
However, I'm a realist as well. I look at laws of nature, and I look at history, and history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. You mentioned revolutions. Revolutions don't work.
Yep.
It's violence doesn't work. At the end of the day, people that have more power, whether it's through means of force or means of coercion, whatever, they're going to overtake you. I'm a firm believer in better technologies and better education, slowly, not through a quick sweep, but slowly over time generates a better society. Now, mind you, for all the shit that we're in, if we're comparing how life was 100 years ago, I'm fucking happy I'm living today.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I wouldn't want to live 100 years ago. Even though like people, people hate social media, this, I'm like, bro, I fucking love this. It's a tool.
Yeah.
Like a hammer is a tool. It's how you use this tool, right? That matters. People talk about guns. I'm like, it's not the gun that kills people. People kill people. It's their psychology.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so for me, it's like I see the writing on the wall. I'm in the crypto space. You see Bitcoin transforming how the way things are done. You see now privacy is becoming more and more important. I see there's a resurgence around the world. You see what's happening in Hong Kong. You see what's happening even in Europe. People are waking up. You see what's happening in Latin America. I think. Oh yeah. I think just the advent of more evolved technologies that are superior to old technologies will slowly outpace. And at the end of the day, certain powers that be don't really have a choice. They have to adopt or else they're out of power.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of that. Yeah, I think there's some kind of awakening happening. Like I'm seeing it. I mean, I travel a lot. I meet so many people, and I see people switching on. The thing is that what the powers that be they're really good at, but it's once you start to see these things, you see the patterns that they use is that they do co-opt movements to basically like take power away from those movements. And I'd seen that because I'd been an environmentalist since I was 12 years old. I'm 40 years old now. So, I mean, I've been at this kind of for a long time in that. And, I've seen that movement be completely co-opted by big finance who just use it as a mechanism to control people, like the Greta Thunberg